He's a nameplate as of the moment.
Okay, I don't see his nameplate, but okay.
You can slide the images, Barbara, depending upon your view.
Yeah, no, there's a square where he could be, and it's just black. So it's not that. I've got 94 times 5. I've got 19 pictures here. So no, so
Hey, it's Joe. I dialed in since it seems to be having problems with the video, so I'm on.
okay.
We're all here.
Okay.
Okay, the recording is going. The streaming is beginning in just a moment.
Okay, are we in place?
I believe so.
Excellent. May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Listener.
Here.
Trustee Miller.
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Here.
Trustee Rubin.
Here.
Trustee Vree.
Here. Okay, I will give my usual speech that we do at the beginning of virtual meetings, that today's special village board meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting via Zoom webinar software and is being audio recorded and simulcast on the village's Facebook page as the village continues to support social distancing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. A quorum of members of the board are present via remote access. Before we begin the formal business of the agenda, I would like to ask our village attorney, Steve Elrod, to explain the legal basis for holding a virtual meeting. Steve?
Thank you, President Levin. We are here once again, as you indicate, virtually and lawfully. The basis that we are here and operating under today remains the emergency declaration and subsequent order entered by Governor Pritzker. As you may know, the state legislature has adopted an amendment to the Illinois Open Meetings Act that would allow for virtual meetings going forward. Previously, the Open Meetings Act required there be a majority of a quorum at the village hall. That legislation has not yet been signed by the governor. If and when it does get signed, we will be able to have Open Meetings Act during an emergency situation with nobody present from the village board except perhaps one member or the village manager or the village attorney. All other members of the board can be, any one of those can be present at the village hall. All others could remain on a virtual meeting basis. Until that act gets signed, however, on Friday, the governor entered a new order that would basically fill the gap and allow us to continue meeting virtually, in this instance with nobody present at the village hall. And that is the basis that we're operating under now. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Also, I wanted to give my usual requests with respect to our virtual meeting, that each of the members of the board and staff mute your lines if you're not speaking and unmute your lines when you speak to help minimize background noise. For the members of the public are muted and should remain muted during the meeting. Members of the public should not share their video. To turn off your video, click the video camera button at the bottom of your screen so that the button turns red. After each agenda item is presented, I will ask the trustees if they have any questions or comments, and I will call the trustees in alphabetical order. I will ask for a roll call rather than a voice vote on any agenda item requiring a vote. In accordance with the supplemental rules the board approved on April 16th, 2020, here is how public comment will be taken at this meeting. The email address and telephone number designated for public comment were included among the materials that were published with the meeting agenda. At this time, I'll ask Management Analyst and Deputy Village Clerk Jordan Lester to read the public comments on non-agenda items that were submitted prior to the meeting in compliance with the instructions that were previously published with the meeting materials. Comments that were submitted relating to agenda items will be read when we arrive at that point in the agenda. If a member of the public would like to submit a public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to glencoemeeting@villageofglencoe.org. Let me repeat that, Glencoe meeting, and that's singular, at villageofglencoe.org. Comments submitted during the meeting may be read at the end of the meeting. Written comments should be limited to 400 words. Jordan, do you have any public comments that we should be reading now that were submitted on non-agenda items?
Good evening, President Levin. This is Jordan Lester. We did not receive any public comment on non-agenda items.
Thank you. Tonight, we are not having, in order to move the meeting along, any committee reports, plus the fact that there really isn't anything to report on that's meaningful at this point. Village Manager, Mr. Crowley, could I have the Village Manager's report, please?
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us, those of you who are watching on Facebook, and thanks for everyone for making time in your schedule for this special meeting. I just have one item on the Village Manager's report this evening, and this will be primarily presented by Public Safety Director Carrie Lewandowski. Obviously, these past few days have been very difficult ones for the nation, for our state, for our region, and for our community as a whole. Our village team, particularly in the last 36 hours, has been focused on the safety and well-being of the Glencoe community as these difficult days have passed. I've asked Public Safety Director Lewandowski to just provide a brief overview of these efforts this evening and to answer any questions that the board may have of him. So, Chief, if you would.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just want to take a few minutes to brief you about the Public Safety Department's readiness to address any potential looting or violence that may occur related to what's been going on throughout the Chicago area over the last few days, as well as today. We're presently monitoring some activities surrounding us, but nothing specific here right now. First of all, we've increased the number of officers on duty to maintain the highest visibility possible throughout town, whether it's on the roadways leaving into town or the downtown area itself. We're trying to be as visible as we can so people feel safe and that we have some visibility to thwart any criminal elements that may want to come to Glencoe and wreak havoc. In addition, we participate in mutual aid organizations that provide additional manpower and resources for large-scale events just like this. With one call, additional manpower from surrounding police departments can respond immediately to assist our officers. We also monitor numerous law enforcement intelligence services that provide real-time tracking of these groups' movements throughout the area, so we can plan accordingly and work with our partner agencies to come up with combined response plans. I'd like to stress that there have been no indications that Glencoe is a target for any activities at this time. However, it's important for our residents and businesses to exercise caution and be aware of their surroundings at all times and do what they can to secure their properties. Please call 911 if you witness suspicious activity or need police assistance in any way. And as always, our officers stand ready to maintain the safety and security of the community. And we are here to serve. And if you need us, we will be here. Thank you.
And as I mentioned,
Are there any questions? Let me just go quickly down the list. Joe, do you have any questions for Carrie?
No question. back late last night, roughly 9 o'clock, and I noted that there was a very visible police presence in Glencoe. That was much appreciated. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Gail, any questions or
No,
comments?
I don't have any questions either, and I also would like to thank the chief very much for everything that he and public safety is doing for us.
Thank you.
Barbara, any comments or questions?
Just thank you to all of public safety. I know it's been a rough time and we really appreciate it.
Gary?
No questions, and just reiterating, because we really all do appreciate very, very much what you and your entire staff at Public Safety do for us. Thank you.
Peter, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Chief. And again, could you just comment on the training you've received? It was adequate, not adequate, just right?
Our training is more than adequate, especially because these, the NIPUS unit, the police SWAT team, so to speak, we have 2 members that are part of that. So they get extensive training over and above what normal police officers have for things like this. And they bring that back to the department, and they train our officers to learn some of the skills that they have for being members of that. So we are more than ready, based on our training.
Great, thank you.
Jonathan Bree, any comments or questions?
Just reiterate the appreciation and, but no questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
I would like to say on behalf of the board, to you, Carrie, and to you, David, we thank Public Works and Public Safety for all the tremendous extra effort and hard work and things they've been doing. You guys have done a tremendous job, and we want to make sure that you express on behalf of the entire board that belief to all of our people that are out there doing all the things that are necessary to keep us safe and functional.
Will do. Thanks.
Anything else, Phil, in the manager's report?
No, that's it, President Levin, unless there are other questions on anything else.
Not hearing any. In terms of the president's report, we have the normal thing that we take up at this point in time during these current crisis, which is that we need to extend the declaration of emergency that expires at the end of these meetings that we have. We've gone over that in the past, so you're used to my asking for that. So unless there are any questions, I would request a motion to approve the extension of the emergency orders until the adjournment of the next regular, special, or emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees. Could I have a motion, please?
Mulvaney, so moved.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax.
Joe, you're on mute.
Joe, can you hear us? Your mic is muted, so.
There we go.
I apologize. I'm having some issues here. Yes.
Thank
Trustee,
you, Joe.
Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
Okay, the only other thing on my list for tonight is to remind everybody that our next regular meeting of the board will take place on June 18th. All right, there are no consent agenda items this evening, so we can move to the purpose of our special meeting, which is discussion regarding outdoor dining program enhancements and consideration of a resolution authorizing an auxiliary outdoor seating area program for restaurants. And I'm going to ask Sharon Tanner and Jordan and Taylor Baxter to present that to us. I'm not sure which order, gang, you're going to go in, but it's your show now.
Thank you, President Levin. This is Management Analyst, Deputy Village Clerk Jordan Lester. I will be beginning our presentation. We do have a couple slides on deck. So So just want to wait till we get that presentation up. Okay, wonderful. First slide, please.
Okay, those were very visible. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. As I mentioned, this is Management Analyst, Deputy Village Clerk Jordan Lester. As a continuation of the board's discussion on outdoor dining at the May 21st Committee of the Whole meeting, the Business Services team will be presenting information this evening on updated outdoor seating concepts in downtown Glencoe for the 2020 summer season. These proposed concepts are in response to Phase 3 guidelines for all restaurants and bars within the state of Illinois, as per Governor J.B. Pritzker's Restore Illinois plan. As of last Friday, May 29th, all regions in the state of Illinois, including the region that Glencoe is in, have moved to Phase 3 of the plan. I will make note that the discussion for this evening and the concepts for this evening are separate from the village's regular outdoor seating permit program, which typically permits seating on the sidewalk only. So as a recap of the May 21st Committee of the Whole meeting, the board indicated a preference for closing Vernon Avenue over using on-street parking spaces. Since the feedback we received since that time, staff has been in contact with all open Glencoe restaurants, as well as non-restaurant businesses in downtown Glencoe to seek their input on proposed Vernon Avenue closure. Glencoe restaurants indicated that from an operational standpoint, extended closures are more feasible for their staff rather than short-term closures. Now, this is primarily due to the time needed for restaurant staff to move furniture to and from alternate locations to the middle of the street, as well as the time required to close the street through traffic. In addition, our restaurants that provide carryout heavy services requested specific locations in downtown Glencoe where patrons can pick up their food from the restaurant and then take to an alternate location to eat their meal. In staff's conversations with non-restaurant businesses in downtown Glencoe, these businesses expressed support for providing outdoor seating in the downtown. However, they did express their concern about the loss of on-street parking spaces in front of their business that would occur as a result of any possible Vernon Avenue closure. So for board review and feedback this evening, which we'll go into further detail next, the Business Services team is presenting 3 different concepts. So the first concept is the Vernon Avenue closure, which was discussed at the last meeting, for a weekend usage. Next, the closure of the Village Court parking lot on a daily basis. And last, as a concept which can be used in tandem with either of the two or completely separately, using Wyman Green as a picnic area. So again, as I mentioned during the May 21st meeting, this is an iterative process. We are continuing to have an ongoing discussion with our restaurant community, our non-restaurant business community, and we intend to keep in communication with them, especially throughout the next few weeks and throughout the entire summer, to make sure that we're taking the most appropriate action for our community. So thank you, and Taylor.
Thank you, Jordan, Mr. President, members of the board. I'm going to go ahead and walk through these 3 concepts. I'm trying to get my slides to work. Just give me one moment, please. So the first concept, concept 1, is based on one of the concepts that was presented at the previous board meeting. And this was the full closure to vehicular traffic of Vernon Avenue between Park and Hazel. And this concept would involve the closure on weekends only. So that would be from either Thursday or Friday evening through Sunday evening continually. On Sunday evening, the restaurants would have to take down the tables and they would be set up again the following Thursday or Friday evening. This concept, the green areas on the map show the 2 separate seating areas to the north and south of the entrance to the Village Court parking lot. These two separate seating areas, this concept came from the need to allow for emergency access between the Village Court parking lot and the alley system to the west of Vernon Avenue. So there would be no seating allowed between these traffic cones that are shown on the map in case an emergency vehicle needed to access that area. This concept would result in the loss of 56 parking spaces during the time that the street is closed to vehicular traffic, but it would provide approximately 23,000 square feet of new dining area. And this would be directly in front of the restaurants along this block. This concept gives an idea of how tables may be arranged along this block while still maintaining state social distancing requirements. This is very much a conceptual plan. What actually would happen out here may look very different than this. The purpose of this slide is just to give an idea of how much space a typical table with chairs might take up if it's spaced in such a way to maintain social distancing requirements. So each of these squares represents a table with chairs around it with at least 6 feet between the backs of the chairs. So this just gives you a general idea of how many tables might be able to be placed in this area. Again, the restaurants may have a very different idea of how they want these tables to be arranged. What we would be requiring from them is a site plan that we would look over before permitting them to put their tables out there that shows that they're going to meet the social distancing requirements from the state. You can see again the traffic cones near the entrance to the Village Court parking lot there, showing the seating areas divided into two on the north and south end of the block. The second concept is a new one. This came to us from the restaurant owners themselves last week as somewhat of a new idea. At the previous Village Board meeting, we talked about potentially opening up the Village Court parking lot for more of a picnic style area that would be available for more carry-out focused businesses. People could take away their food, go and sit in this area, and you would have picnic tables that were not tied to any specific restaurant. Unlike that previous concept for Village Court parking lot, this would not close the entire parking lot, first of all. It would also have areas set up for specific restaurants to use. So again, this would have a barricade closure at the access point to Vernon Avenue, but it would maintain vehicular traffic for an one-way exit from Grand Foods to allow exiting out of the Grand Foods parking lot to Village Court only, not to Vernon Avenue, and also two-way traffic to provide access from Village Court only to the parking lot at the back of 340 to 344 Park. This would have two options. The first option is to just use the green area, the western approximately 1/3 of the lot. And this would be closed down continually, likely through, as long as needed, potentially through the rest of the outdoor dining season, to allow the restaurants to avoid having to continuously take down and put back out their dining equipment, the tables and chairs. This could potentially be combined with the use of tents that would be placed in this area on a semi-permanent basis. These tents would have to be open to meet open on the sides to meet the outdoor dining requirements, potentially closed at night to allow tables and chairs to remain in place. Those details are still being worked out with the restaurants. The western portion of the lot, the green area, would involve the loss of 20 parking spaces, but would provide approximately 8,000 square feet of new dining area. Potentially, we could add the blue area, which is the parking median, the central parking area of this parking lot, to that area to provide some more space. That would be another 26 parking spaces and an additional 5,500 square feet of dining area. Similar diagram to the previous one. This is again just very conceptual in nature and very much subject to change depending on the needs of the restaurants and the way that they want to arrange their tables. and potentially even tents. But again, this is just to give an idea of how many tables might be placed in this area while maintaining that 6-foot separation. But again, this might change depending on tent usage, and combining tables is needed. Finally, the wine green picnic seating area. This would be similar in concept to what was discussed about the previous Village Court parking lot concept. These would be picnic tables in addition to one of the other two concepts. So it would be either concept 1, the Vernon closure concept, or concept 2, the Village Court parking lot, and concept 3. Again, these tables would not be maintained by the restaurants themselves. They would be really focused on allowing people to go to the more carry-out focused businesses and take their food to this location, enjoy their food at any table in that area. It would not be assigned, the areas would not be assigned to specific restaurants. With that, I will turn it over to Sharon for some more discussion.
Super, thanks, Taylor. Before we dive into questions and ask for the board's feedback, there are a few additional things that we'd like to highlight with regards to the central dining area concepts. First, in our conversations with the restaurants and the business community, we talked quite a bit about some potential benefits and potential concerns about both of the two areas that are proposed. They're generally inverses, where one may be a benefit in one concept, it may be a concern in another. With regards to the size of the dining area available, certainly the Vernon Avenue option provides more space. The Village Court option is smaller, but the Village Court option provides better ability to use a tent to mitigate risks due to mild inclement weather, such as just drizzle or maybe a hot day when some shielding from the sun would be nice, versus the Vernon Avenue option, which doesn't lend itself to tenting quite as readily because of the mobilization cost and resources required to do that on a weekly basis. More broadly, speaking of mobilization resources, the resources required for restaurants in staff and in time, and therefore cost, are certainly greater with a weekly closure compared to a seasonal closure. So the Village Court option provides a less resource intensive option than the Vernon Avenue option. The Vernon Avenue option, however, has the benefit for our Vernon Avenue restaurants of being very proximate to the restaurants. However, it's not proximate to all of the restaurants in the community. With the Vernon Avenue option, there's also the impact of on-street parking. As Taylor had noted, there are approximately 56 parking spaces on Vernon Avenue that would require closure on a weekly basis to accommodate that weekend continuous closure. As Jordan had alluded to earlier in the presentation, that was a concern that was raised by members of the business community at large, as well as some of the restaurants, that while there was support across the board for the village doing something to provide enhanced outdoor dining seating, that it not be done in a manner that could potentially be at the detriment of the businesses that are not restaurants, so the salons and the retailers and other personal service businesses. With regards to our dine-in restaurants and some of the feedback that we heard, Guildhall had expressed a strong preference for the Village Court option and had indicated that they may perhaps consider a tent. Valor had expressed a preference for space that's directly in front of the restaurant, like the Vernon Avenue closure, or even, as we had talked about in our first conversation, parking spaces being dedicated in front of the restaurant that could be used for seating. But they did also indicate that if the Village Court option is ultimately the board's preference, that they expect to utilize it and they would be supportive of that. It's simply not their first choice. Meg's Apple a Day had a higher level of preference for the Village Court option, as well as a Wyman Green picnic option for carry-out style seating. And then some of our other restaurants that are more carry-out focused have, throughout our conversations, shared their desire for there to be some sort of carry-out seating where someone could take a sandwich or a cup of coffee or a snack of some sort and then be able to enjoy their purchase and enjoy spending time in downtown Glencoe. All that being said, we recognize that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And in our last conversation, the board had shared really excellent feedback with us. And one of the points that we've kept very much front of mind is the notion that we may try something and we may make adjustments. Jordan mentioned at the onset of the presentation that we've been in close contact and will stay in close contact with the restaurants and the businesses. And that's something I wanted to underscore, that we'll stay in contact with our key stakeholders to learn if we try an option, what went well, what could be improved. Do we make modifications or adjustments to something along the way, or do we scrap one idea entirely and try something different in order to provide the best experience for all of our stakeholders? So with all that in mind, the feedback that we're asking for from the board this evening is, first, for a centralized dining area, do you want to create one? And if so, your preference between Vernon Avenue, Village Court, or going back to the drawing board for something else entirely. If you have a preference for the Vernon Avenue option, we'd like to talk a bit about whether you're comfortable with a full weekend closure and if you have a preference for starting that on Thursday or Friday afternoon in order to potentially accommodate a Friday lunch operation. If the Village Court option is your preference, we don't need to get into that, but we would like your feedback as to whether you're comfortable with the season closure of that portion of the parking lot. As Taylor had mentioned, for any of the centralized dining areas that we may consider or implement, we would create an application form and do so as expediently as possible so that we can work with our restaurants to get the program up and running for them and for the community. The application will require a site plan, a furniture storage plan, and if a tent's used, information about the tent that's necessary to conduct the appropriate safety inspections to ensure that we're taking all the appropriate steps before it's open to the general public. And if we do move forward with a centralized dining area, one of the notes in the memo, and we didn't highlight it here, but I'd like to mention, is that we'd also like your feedback about giving staff the authority to work with other restaurants on an individual basis if the centralized area that we select simply turns out to be not operationally feasible. So for example, a sit-down restaurant not located on Vernon Avenue, there may be some different opportunities to work out something that's unique to that location, since all of our restaurants are not all on the same street. With regards to the Wyman Green picnic area, much simpler feedback, a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you'd like to move forward with that. It's possible that the Park District may be able to provide some picnic tables, which would be a great partnership opportunity and certainly allow us to provide that at a much lower cost for the community. And last, before we take your questions, I wanted to mention that the resolution that's been prepared for you is not specific to any of the options. It's very flexible in the way that it's written. So should not be any changes that are needed to the resolution in order to accommodate if you have a preference for one of the central dining options, if you'd like to move forward with Wyman Green, if you'd like to give staff the authority to work on a one-off basis with other restaurants. It's very flexible in the way that it's worded. So your feedback is very important. And with that, we'd be able to answer any questions that you may have. And we certainly, again, would like your input.
I think it would be appropriate before the board enters into its discussions to determine if there were any emails that Jordan received with comments on this so that the board can have all the comments before we begin our discussion. Jordan, were there any emails as to this item on the agenda?
Yes, President Levin, we received 4 separate public comments, and do I have your permission to read them now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so one moment as I pull this up. All right, so our first public comment, and this is in no particular order, is from Gil Gabori, CEO and founder of the House Tutoring Lounge, 682 Vernon Avenue in Glencoe. This is Gil's comment. As a follow-up to our discussion with village staff last week, I would like to reiterate a few key points. First, as a background to our own business, the House Tutoring Lounge is a student-only 6th through 12th grade and university student lounge, providing a social space, academic support, and a self-serve cafe. We operate much like a restaurant in terms of socialization and space restrictions. So we do plan to utilize any outdoor space the village makes available if this initiative moves forward. The below points are to address the needs of our fellow business owners in Glencoe's downtown district. Also, we are thankful to the village staff for their diligent and tireless work in supporting our community. So key points, number 1, we believe the village would be well served to follow the trend started by other proactively minded municipalities to close the main thoroughfare of our downtown while occupancy restrictions are in place by the local and state government. Number 2, we believe given the myriad retailers in Glencoe, restricting this new arrangement to just restaurants and lounges seems deficient. Our community's retail stores, beauty salons, yoga studios can all benefit from the ability to move their businesses onto the street for either added service, retail, or waiting room space. 3, we strongly believe that limiting the timing to just weekends or evenings therein will place a burden on businesses to move and store the excess furniture needed to provide seating on Vernon. A season-wide closing of Vernon, to our mind, would be ideal. We expect this would be on a rolling basis as the state transitions into subsequent phases. Otherwise, we believe closing the street for the entire weekend would be preferable to evenings only. The unifying message to our public comments is to emphasize that Glencoe has a variety of businesses that will benefit greatly from access to Vernon. As indicated by the outpouring on social media, the Glencoe community welcomes closing Vernon for the sake of our businesses. I hope the village moves to do so quickly in order to match the severity of the crisis. So that was public comment number 1. Would you like me to proceed with the next, President Levin? Okay, I will move on to the next one then. The second public comment is from Kevin Campbell, who is a Glencoe commercial property owner. This is Kevin's comment. I have dine-in restaurant, salon, retail, carry-out restaurant, and dry cleaning tenants on the Vernon Avenue block under discussion. I have had mixed feedback from my tenants about closing Vernon Avenue in order to accommodate outdoor restaurant seating and service. The business owners have legitimate concerns about the loss of parking. Parking has always been an issue in Glencoe. Closing off 2 blocks of prime downtown thoroughfare and parking for any period of time on a repeated basis must be considered carefully, very carefully. Our small businesses have been slammed by COVID-19 and the enforced closures by Governor Pritzker, and we must be sensitive to the challenges our businesses are facing. Other North Shore communities, including Lake Forest, Highland Park, Winnetka, and Wilmette, are permitting their restaurants to serve on the sidewalks. This should be permitted in Glencoe, and perhaps we can expand the sidewalk area that the restaurants can utilize for outdoor dining. On another note, I encourage the village staff and administrators to get the word out via any and all sources that Glencoe businesses are open, that they are undertaking safety measures for their clients and customers, and that it is critical to support these very important businesses in their community. Thank you. Respectfully, Kevin Campbell. That is the second public comment that we received. The third public comment is from current Sustainability Task Force Chair Elseve Shimopanik van der Oye. Dear all, the Glencoe Sustainability Task Force would like to submit the following comment for the village board meeting. Hal Healy will be attending the meeting on behalf of the Sustainability Task Force. Many thanks, Elseve. And here's the task force's comment. The Glencoe Sustainability Task Force fully supports the closing of the street to enable and support the local businesses. The Glencoe Sustainability Task Force would also like to discuss sustainable practices with the businesses as soon as possible, which could also possible result in savings, including but not limited to combining compost collection and encouraging patrons to bring their own water bottles and cutlery to avoid the use of plastic cups. As a solution for possible parking issues, the Glencoe Sustainability Task Force would like to suggest the active promotion of walking and biking to the downtown area with a request to the village to provide bike parking spaces. So that concludes our third public comment. And last is a public comment from resident Rebecca Hoffman. And this is Ms. Hoffman's public comment. Hi, I love the idea of outdoor seating and closing the street to make this possible. I also wonder if a couple food trucks could be placed in a large parking lot and add a little mix to what is currently available. We have an ideal space to do this, and helping to bring back some vitality to our central town core is very appealing to me. I also wonder if there are any portable hand sanitizing stations that could be put in place to encourage people to keep clean and participate in the effort to make a comeback, but safely. Would the town be able to provide Glencoe branded face masks? Might be something nice that people would appreciate if they have forgotten theirs or don't have one. And that concludes our public comment for this evening, President Levin.
Thank you, Jordan. Do any of the restaurants that are attending on the over the Facebook page have any hands raised or wish to make a comment to us, Jordan?
If any of the restaurants who are joining the webinar as an attendee would like to, please hit the raise hand button, and then we can acknowledge you individually and unmute your line. Otherwise, your line is muted. And if I may, President Livin, while folks are finding that button, if they wish to use it, the comment from the Sustainability Task Force reminds me of an important point, which is that if in any option for a centralized dining area, if a restaurant would like to do so, it can continue to use its normal serviceware. So their utensils, their plates, their glasses that they would use in the restaurant, certainly they could use outdoors at their choice. So they would not be required to use disposable items.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any hands raised from our restaurants.
Okay, then let us go to discussion by the trustees. Joe, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to echo a lot of the thoughts that other trustees will have, but in kind of no uncertain order, it certainly seems that the tent option seems to be most preferred by the businesses, and I'll stick with what I said previously, that I want to give the businesses the best chance to succeed, and they're going to understand the best way with which that is possible. One thing I guess for Shannon is in terms of, you mentioned there's a cost. So ultimately it's cheaper to have the tent option than to close the streets from Thursday to Sunday. Is there any indication of what those costs are, just to make sure that we have that available for the records?
If I could clarify that, and perhaps this might help answer the question. There were two parts to the mobilization comment in the mobilization resources that were required. First was around tents. We're anticipating that a weekly rental for a limited period of time and having that delivered, set up, taken down, taken back, taken away someplace, and repeating that process would likely be more expensive than a season-long tent, but we don't have the cost estimates for that. It would likely be dependent on the type of tent and any arrangements that an individual business may have. The second component of the mobilization cost is just strictly around the furniture setup, where if a restaurant were to set up and remove their furniture on a weekly basis, that would certainly require more staff time than if they were to set it once and leave it out, or be able to secure it in an area and not have to do a full setup and tear down each week.
Great, thanks. I had heard mostly feedback from people that would have preferred Vernon to be closed, but if this is what people, where the restaurants feel they'd be most successful, that tends to be where I would be supportive. I would also add that having the park district with picnic tables for that other area that you mentioned at Wyman Green sounds like a very inexpensive and nice option for even overflow. And then lastly, with regards to food trucks, well, I think it's a wonderful idea, and I've had loads of fun there when we've done it in the past. I still think the goal for me would be to give our businesses the best chance to make it through this. So I would say that they could probably do some kind of makeshift. If we had a tent in that lot, they could have a makeshift way to also serve food and be able to make money. So I would be against having any idea of a food truck. But I did like her idea of masks though too. So that would encourage people to come and not have to walk home to get them. So I'll stop there. I'm sure everybody else has lots of comments.
Thank you, Joe. Gail?
So the village court option is significantly smaller than the closing Vernon option. And what I was wondering about was what was the anticipated capacity that the restaurants were looking for? So did they feel that the village court option, whether it was just the western section or the western section plus the central section, was that going to be adequate for their needs too?
Sure, that's a great question. The village court option came from one of our restaurants. It was an idea that they had proposed, one of our sit-down restaurants. So I'm inclined to believe that they've evaluated that space and find it sufficient. Certainly one of the differences between the two is the size, as you had pointed out. However, seating configuration is not one that we claim to know all the different possibilities of. And so the restaurants may have different seating options that they believe are workable for them based on the number of table turns that they think they can have. And so that's a long answer to your question to say, one of the sit-down restaurants on Vernon has said that they like this idea. They would do it. The other has said they prefer the Guildhall being the one that prefers the village court option. Valor prefers the on-street option, but they did not express a number of tables as the primary reason for their concern.
If I could just add real quick, trustee listener, sorry, I think another thing that plays heavily in some of the opinion from Guildhall relates to the unpredictability of weather and how they staff up to accommodate a street option that has no protection. And so fewer tables may actually be a better option if they can count on those tables, as opposed to more tables that may all get rained out. And so I think that was part of that dialogue that we had, just to add to Sharon's point.
Well, and I do like the village court option because I am concerned about the retailers, in addition to the restaurants. I like the fact that it is something that could be 7 days a week, that doesn't require the setting up and the tearing down, that does have, a little bit more permanence. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And my only concern was that in terms of allocating that space, and just to make sure that that space was going to be adequate for what we thought were the different needs of the various restaurants that would want to utilize that space. In terms of Wyman Green, it sounds like a good idea, providing that the Park District could provide us with the tables, and that wouldn't be a cost. I am a little worried about cleanliness, and so that does concern me, that we're going to be putting something there. Number one, picnic tables, in and of itself means crowding together, so that is a concern. And then the fact that there would be no type of cleaning process between use. We don't want to encourage the spreading of germs. We want to help contain them. And so I think we just have to think that one through in terms of how best to work that out. Those are my only comments at this point.
Okay. Barbara?
really interesting options and great feedback from our businesses and residents. I want to make sure I've got a good picture of the differences in these two options. So the concept one, Vernon closure on the weekend option, would be a loss of 56 parking spaces and a gain of 23,000 square feet of table space. The larger of the two of the two options in concept 2 on Village Court parking lot would be a loss of 46 parking spaces. So that is less, it's 10 less. And the restaurants would gain 13,500 square feet. I would be curious to know what the business's reaction is to whether that is a significant difference in loss of parking, those 10 spaces. And certainly we could try the smaller option, just the west end of Village Court with where there's only a loss of 20 spaces, I think, and a much smaller gain in tables, 8,000 square feet. And I suppose that's the conservative thing. There certainly seems to me to be a bit of a tension between the needs of the business community and my perception of the desires of the residents in general. I think there's just an excitement around, and I can I can certainly understand it, the idea of almost a boulevard feel by closing Vernon off. I assume, I didn't see it in the drawing you had, but in that option, I'm assuming that there would be plenty of room for pedestrians to walk as well. There wouldn't be solid tables. Is that right, Sharon and Phil?
It's very possible that it could be configured that way. We were not predisposed to one configuration or another. So there certainly could be that boulevard walkway through, or the sidewalks could be utilized by pedestrians.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely not be in favor of Vernon if there weren't relative ease for pedestrians, just because I think for the sake of the non-restaurant businesses, they need to have access, and just for people who want to stroll. So that may change the square footage gain if we were to allow for pedestrian access. So I would, if we could find a way to make the Vernon closure work, I think it would be a lot of fun. But with so much concern from the business community, and I have to trust that they're the ones who know their interests best, I would have to follow my fellow trustees and prefer the Village Court option. You did mention, I think, that you wanted our feedback on working with individual restaurants that maybe aren't so well accommodated by either of these, and thumbs up to that, absolutely. Wyman Green, I share trustee listeners' concern about, I think it's great to have tables. I think one option might be to try to do it on an experimental basis and see if we get the sense that there is a lot of crowding. I wouldn't want us contributing to an unsafe condition. So we could try it with some tables from the Park District, and with signage, requesting that no more than X number of people be at a table, that kind of thing, and see how that goes. And if it doesn't go well, we might change our minds about it. I think the fluidity is pretty important here. And I think that we hopefully can get that message out to our residents that anything we do is on a trial basis. I think those are my comments. If we could do the hand sanitizer thing and the face mask, that'd be great, but my guess is the cost may be prohibitive on that. But I think it's a very cool idea.
Thank you, Barbara. Peter Mulvaney?
Hi. I must have heard it a little differently than my fellow trustees. I am an advocate of the closing of Vernon. I thought that's what I heard from many of the comments, but I also have a lot of concerns even about that. For example, I'm wondering if any of these restaurants talked about the demand. What is the anticipated demand? Do they actually need all of Vernon? I'm very concerned about the allocation of space and thinking only about restaurants. I think the CEO there of House made some very valid points that other businesses could benefit from access to the right-of-way. It shouldn't necessarily only be thought of as a restaurant area. And with the closure, I don't see why we couldn't organize different times and have retail and operations from House and others during certain hours and after whatever, 6:30, it's becomes all dedicated to restaurants. So I'm worried about some of the allocation rules. Who gets what space and how much? Is it a free-for-all? Whoever's got the most tables, put them out there? Or how do we allocate that? And again, considering more than just restaurant allocation of this public space, but rather what's the highest value? What's the demand for the space? Who needs it when? And I don't know that we have that data. We may not get that data. That's okay. We should make our best estimate. But those are the sorts of things that, well, I guess we'll learn if we try. If we don't try it, we won't learn. Another thing I'm really worried about is that we've sort of framed this as either or. Why is it either or? These shouldn't be mutually exclusive options. I don't see why you couldn't have the centralized picnic type area that's not served by waiter staff, open. And during whatever it is, Thursday through Sunday, Vernon is closed. I don't know why we want to frame this as one or the other. It seems like they're very compatible with each other. And it seems like they could just be different timing, not one versus the other. So I'm in favor of both. Actually, initially I said I'm in favor of closing Vernon. I am. I'm also in favor of providing the western side of the central lot open for public seating. I'd like the Sustainability Task Force comments. You know, I know there's a lot of concern about parking and access, but the truth is there's quite a bit of parking even outside of those areas. And if we make walking and biking more available, I think that would be terrific. If we provide the biking spaces and area for pedestrians, why not? I see a whole lot more people outdoor these days than I ever have before. More people are walking, more people are biking. Let's keep that trend up. I think that's positive for Glencoe. As for Wyman Green, I'm not all that interested, to be honest, in the Wyman Green option for the issues that Trustee Listener expressed. And beyond that, if we would do the other two options, I don't know that there'd really be a demand for that. But again, I don't see why it needs to be taken off the table right away. Put the tables on the grass and see if people want to use it. If not, take the tables away, or if they're a problem. So those are my initial thoughts. I'm eager to experiment and try, and let's see what works. It seems to me, though, if I were, and again, I'm not the expert here, but as the CEO from House said, I think he'd rather have space outdoors where they can exercise, where the yoga studio can run some classes outdoors, than 2 parking spaces that go essentially unused. So those are my initial thoughts. I'm happy to maybe chime in later if we can.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Gary, Ruben?
First and foremost, I again thank the staff for all the work you're doing on this and for the thoughtful presentation and for the resolution and the flexibility within it. I hadn't read it again today, but I do like the idea, depending upon which way we go with the closure of the road or parking spaces, et cetera, in terms of allowing businesses other than the restaurants to also make use of that space if they can do so. In terms of helping them, that would be great. There's a lot of shall we say, technical issues to work out in terms of not wanting to increase the restaurant's costs, which is a factor that I'm hearing in the feedback. So, you know, they're working on thin enough margins and have been hit hard enough as it is. So, you know, I'd certainly be in favor of using the parking lot, including the central part of the parking lot as well as the western part. I don't know then if you can close off all of Vernon as well as a technical matter because of emergency vehicle access to certain parts along Vernon. But whatever can reasonably be accomplished that makes sense, I'm fine with. So I say maximum flexibility. I agree. Let's try the things that seem to be the most popular that restaurants actually say and other retailers actually say they'll make use of if we make it available to them. You're not going to have the perfect, absolute right solution because there probably isn't one. And so let's pick some things that make sense and go forward and try things and be willing to be flexible and try other things. The Wyman Green option, my concerns as were expressed by Gail and Barbara have to do with sort of the cleanup aspect of that, which is who's going to do it? Is everyone going to police themselves? Are we going to have a lot more, you know, garbage cans, et cetera? Who's going to be policing those and emptying those on the weekends, on evenings? It's not that we can't do it, shouldn't do it, but I do think that's an added operational factor that we need to take into account. If we're successful, then what? People aren't likely to be carrying their trash back to their homes and throwing it out. So we need to make sure we don't have overstuffed garbage cans on a Friday night, and that means having public works folks be working when they might not otherwise be taking care of that sort of stuff. So there are all kinds of issues in that regard. I don't know that we as a village are the ones providing the hand sanitizer and the masks. We all have to have that for ourselves anyway when we're going out and about. So I don't really think that as part of this, we do that. I think the restaurants, for the restaurant space, you know, if they want to have, they'll have to have probably hand sanitizer up about, but masks, I don't even know about that because you're talking about people being outdoors. So I say go forth, keep finding out more information, but at some point soon, since we're starting to enjoy some nice weather when it's not raining, let's pick some paths and go forward. And thank you all for doing all the hard work so quickly on this.
Thank you, Gary. Jonathan Vree.
Okay, thanks. So really, I'd be in favor of a seasonal closing of Vernon rather than just weekends or certain periods of time. While the parking concerns are without a doubt valid, it's always a complaint in the town. There are parking spots, and being able to help business-wise with as much space as possible, I think makes the most sense. And I don't think limiting it to restaurants is what we should be doing. I mean, Reach can do yoga classes outside. The house can do some of their things outside. Dry cleaners, it's, you know, they would suffer a little bit, but maybe dedicating parking spots specifically to some of the businesses who are losing parking spots in the lot maybe helps alleviate some of that. So they benefit by having just their own spots. I don't know, but to me, giving as much space as possible outside makes sense. And so I'd be in favor of a seasonal closing of Vernon, not just weekends. Now, I don't know if that's even on the table, but that would be what I would prefer. Between weekends closing of Vernon or or the permanent closure of the parts of the parking lot, that's going to be based on the feedback from the restaurants and from the retailers, because you're not getting nearly as much space for almost as many parking spots. So if parking is the main concern, you know, your cost benefits not equaling. And The other side would be just how much space, how do you allocate space in such a limited amount of space between all the different restaurants? So it's not all that much. I mean, I guess, you know, visually, I'm trying to picture it, I'm not sure, but it didn't seem like it was a ton of space. There may not be a ton of demand, so maybe that's all the space we need. But if you've got Meg's, if you've got Red Hen, you've got some of the other restaurants that might not be right there, but they may want some space. At what point does it get too crowded? So that's where that's why I just prefer Vernon, just giving as much space as possible, and trying to work with those people who are not benefiting from it. Perhaps, you know, maybe there's ways to do so. So, you know, that's where I stand. As far as Wyman Green goes, I think all of those things were good points. Cleanliness is going to be an issue. I mean, you know, all this stuff actually sounds great for a normal summer, but we still need to keep in mind that there's a virus that we're trying to work around. And so we don't want it to be too crowded. And maybe Wyman Green would be a little crowded. I agree with Pete though, and everybody just giving something a shot makes sense, but making sure it's spread out and that we're not causing big groups of people crowding together. And then the cleanliness, you know, cleaning up after it would be an issue as well. So I guess, you know, all that where I stand, it's, you know, allocating space is going to be tough. So the more space we have to allocate, I think is better. I think we want to help all the businesses in any way we can, understanding that there's no perfect answer. And to me, more outdoor space is better, and seasonally closing Vernon to me makes the most sense.
Gary.
Just a follow-up question. Did any of the restaurants in particular on Vernon, where if we close the street off, were they concerned about losing or having an adverse effect on their carryout business?
That was expressed as a concern, certainly. I think a longer-term closure of Vernon would require designated parking spaces within a reasonable distance that would allow for carryout. I think we have to also acknowledge that there's a pretty significant carryout business that's been built during this period of time. So I think that's a concern. We'd have to find those spaces and designate them appropriately. The other thing I'll say relative to some of the dialogue, and I think it's all really great and helpful to us. We don't have as much feedback from some of the retailers as perhaps we'd like. I think as they were all getting ready this week to accommodate phase 3 reopening, it was a bit difficult for all of us to connect along those lines. And I do think there's some concern about Vernon. The meeting that we had with some of the business community was anxious about the salons that are on Vernon that have quite a bit of to and go traffic that comes on a fairly regular basis with some folks who have some mobility issues. So I do think there are considerations such as those that we do have to keep in mind. They are not insurmountable, but I do think they're part of the dialogue for sure.
All right. I don't know that it's easy to summarize as it usually is. This, I will offer some thoughts or comments. One, it would seem to me that Wyman Green should be considered as an area for the exercise people to be able to hold classes on, things that wouldn't require a lot of cleanup. And for those who want to use it for a picnic area, have them have a designated area there that they're responsible for keeping clean if you're a business that wants to use it that way. Having grown up in the restaurant business, I would be very surprised if it's economic for the restaurant to do something where you spend an afternoon setting it up, have it for maybe 2 days, and then have to take it down, and you don't have adequate protection against weather, since this is outside, with what a wonderful rainy season we had in May and may have in June. And so I would normally say from having grown up and spent many years looking at how do you run a restaurant and what it costs, having an area where you could set up, have your designated tables, and have it covered so that you could use it in rain and you wouldn't have the tremendous cost and personnel and rental of taking stuff down and putting it back up once every week or more. That it makes much more sense to me for the restaurants to put the tables and to use our parking lot, and to that way leave the spaces open in front of the retail businesses. And from having some pretty good knowledge and a lot of years spent looking at retail, that they're going to find it very difficult to operate if we take all the spaces in front of them away, especially things like hair salons. And it will be much more difficult for the pickup business that our restaurants have developed to keep that going in the same way and to maintain it if you can't park where people normally park right now. So I'm not overwhelmed by the idea of closing Vernon just partially. If we were recommending closing it entirely for this period, it might be economically a little different because then you could have the continued setup in that. But my biggest comment is I think we have to understand much better what the retailers need and to work very closely to make sure that the restaurants have conveyed to us what they need, because it's very difficult to operate the way we're talking about with opening and closing Vernon Avenue. And I think we have to understand the complexity of that and have come up with solutions before we just go and do it. And time is of the essence. So for whatever it's worth, those are my added comments to what we looked at. Does anyone else on the board have anything they want to add? Barbara.
Two things. One is no matter what we do, if it is possible to get more bike racks, I think that would be huge. I don't know that they have to be necessarily right where the bicyclist destination is, because I'm assuming if you can ride a bike into town, you can probably walk 50 or 100 yards to your destination. But it does seem to me there's that, you know, I mean, I would say it's a no-brainer, except that I know it's a cost and finding the space isn't always easy, but I just want to make sure that doesn't fall off the radar in this. The only amendment I want to make to my own comments is that while my first choice would be the concept two, the village court, because I believe that's going to work the best for the businesses. I do agree that if we go with the Vernon closure, it probably would make sense to do it continuously rather than picking up and closing down. But that would really, I think the feedback from the business owners, from the restaurant owners, would be the guiding principle there. And then the last thing I want to say is that my top concern is really whatever we can do the soonest. So if one of these options is going to, take a couple of weeks of figuring out and startup time, to me, that would eliminate that option, because we don't have a really long season here. That's it.
Peter.
Yeah, so I guess a few things. I want to clarify and make sure I understand the Central Park area. Is it true that that is not intended to be a wait service area, but rather a place to take out and sit down?
By the central area, do you mean either the Village Court or the Vernon option?
Yes.
Do you mean the parking lot option?
Yes, parking lot.
Those are intended to accommodate dine-in table service. So that certainly could be just as it would for an outdoor seating at one of our sit-down restaurants or an indoor seating now. It could be the same tableside service.
I think it's
okay.
I think it's anticipated that it would be if the two restaurants that are on Vernon would utilize that space.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think President Levin you had summarized with the idea that it's difficult to run the operation with a frequent setup breakdown cycle.
Yeah.
But I think Trustee Vree and I indirectly were also supporting the idea and putting on the table the notion of a longer term closure. I don't know if what needs to happen, if that's a legitimate option that we can evaluate, but I would like to see that, and a more flexible use of that space, as Trustee Vree suggested.
Right. The question there that I had was only one of finding out what does that do to all of our businesses, to the rest of the businesses.
Sure.
And I suspected the reason that it was over the weekend that the staff had talked about shutting down Thursday evening and then going through the weekend was they thought that that would allow the businesses enough time with access to them to satisfy them. But that's why I said we have to understand much better, because I don't think we have an adequate understanding of what our businesses on Vernon think about what would happen to them if they're shut down. And before we do that to them, I think we have to really have understood that thoroughly.
So tonight, I assume, thank you, President Levin, we're not coming to a vote here. We're still in the process of giving a feedback to staff, or are we intending to take an action here? And if so, I would like to, I hope that we could come back and put more options on the table so that we can continually evaluate and adjust.
If I can, I think staff is not intending to articulate that these are the only options that are possible. The reality is, when we talked back on May 21st, there were discussions about the utilization of parking spaces, on-street parking spaces, to accommodate tables. There was some concern about whether that was safe or unsafe. And we, quite frankly, have a limited geography in downtown Glencoe. There are only so many options on the table or available to us. There are concerns that have been articulated by staff relative to the free flow of traffic through the downtown if Vernon Avenue is closed for 4 or 5 months. And if we had another throughway in downtown, that might be less of a concern, but it will push all north-south traffic either to Greenwood or to Village Court, which has some limitations in terms of the way traffic flows through the downtown area. It's not to say that it's an impossibility, it's just to say that that's an issue that we would have to work through. And so when we were putting together alternatives, what we were trying to do was look at impact both from the positive side and the negative side. What is going to negatively impact the downtown? What is going to positively impact the downtown in an era of unknown? And as we move into phase 4, hopefully later this summer, that allows indoor seating at restaurants to begin again, and a portion of it, not fully. They're not allowed to get to their full capacity, but at that point, as we explained back on the 21st, what we were anticipating was any modification to outdoor seating would be in addition to what they were able to accommodate indoors. So with this kind of wholesale shift toward outdoor only seating, that's where we were trying to come up with alternatives that could be palatable. I don't think we have an intention, and if it came across that way, it wasn't intended to, that if Vernon was closed, it would be closed only for the use of restaurants. I think the idea would be that those restaurants aren't operating 24 hours a day, and that if there's space available, that we would certainly be able to work with our retailers and with other service-related businesses there. But that concept of a shortened window for closure was intended to try to alleviate concern of some of those same businesses that might be impacted. So again, the village court option, the parking lot option, was really one that was proffered to us by the two sit-down restaurants, well, one of the sit-down restaurants, as a more viable option. I think if Vernon was closed for the season to traffic, that may be something that both of those restaurants, if they're able to erect a tent, would be pretty happy with. But I do think we would have to deal with some things from an access standpoint, and from a public safety access standpoint, from a bicycle traffic access point, that we would want to work through before a commitment from staff that a full closure for an extended period of time would work on Vernon Avenue. So the difficulty in this time frame is that we are kind of up against the clock. We want to get some relief to our restaurants. We want to do that in a way that doesn't negatively impact the other businesses who themselves have struggled in the last 3 months of the COVID-19 response. So that's where we were approaching this, not intending that it would be the only options. And I think to Sharon's point before, that's why there was some flexibility built into the resolution to accommodate perhaps a one-off circumstance with one of our restaurants, perhaps Meg's, perhaps Hometown, perhaps even Foodstuffs, where if it was safe to do so, perhaps you can even move seating into a parking space on one of those thoroughfares, or into a few parking spaces. I think everyone understands that we're going to lose some parking no matter what we do. And we've got quite a bit of parking in our commuter parking lots. We'd intend to continue to encourage folks to park over there. But we have all heard the arguments that there are not enough parking spaces in town. And that is a point that we want to be sensitive to, particularly to those businesses that have a lot of single stop shopping. It is important to them that there's accessible parking that comes open frequently enough that people can use it. So again, there's no one right answer here, and I think we're all acknowledging that. It's just a matter of trying to come up with an answer and then realize that if that answer is the wrong one, perhaps we adjust it and amend it from that point based on the feedback that we get. But we really would like to get some direction from the board tonight relative to these options that are on the table.
Let me offer this as a possible approach, because I think it's very important to tomorrow being able to go forward with the restaurants and getting something in place so they can start utilizing outdoor dining. It would seem to me that the rational way to handle it, especially until we know much more from the retailers, is to go ahead and implement at this point in time the parking lot option with the center core and the western portion of it, while you continue to work with the other businesses in town on what they need, and to explore what might be done if we were to have a longer term shutdown of Vernon Avenue, so that we can get something in place. We can offer for exercise outdoors or whatever, the use of Wyman Green in that, but we can get something going where the restaurants can set up and start getting revenue flow, still accommodate their pickup business that they have by utilizing the spaces in front of them, and give the merchants the opportunity to do that. And to further study whether you might do something like close down some of the parking spaces on one side to accommodate other businesses or the restaurants, and to come up with more ideas and more information on it. But at least we can get something going now that could last for a couple weeks while we get the other stuff worked through, and then we'll take it up again at our next board meeting. How does that sound to the gang?
I have another question or two for Master Elrod. Legally here, what are the party sizes, reservation size limits, and is it allowed to be mixed use? I mean, not mixed use, but mixed family. how does it work when you're sitting at a table, and what are the rules? Who's allowed to, how big a reservation can I make, and who can sit there?
All good questions, Trustee Mulvaney. I know the answer to several of them. There is no, the governor's order and DCEO, the Department of Economic and Commerce for the state, which has been providing interpretations to the governor's order, has made it clear that there is no limitation on the how do I want to say, the relationships of the customers that are seated there. And I know where you're coming from with that question. It's a legitimate question because earlier there were members of a household that had been part of a definition that does not exist any longer. The number is still at 10 in terms of congregating. And the spatial distance is still the general 6 feet of social distancing. I don't know that tables, I don't know if there's been guidance on the number of tables, types of seat, what?
Well, there's been some guidance on the number that can be at a table. Our understanding is that it's 6.
6. That's what I thought. There are restaurants that have been in other towns offering long picnic table seating, single, just because of the way the table's configured, and they are allowing groups with spaces in between. It would still be, there may be as many as 20 at a single table, but it's like a long bench style table that has been determined to be allowed. Peter, I hope that our Trustee Mulvaney, I hope that is responsive, is sort of evolving as we move through this.
Okay, I guess
And by the way, one other thing, the DCEO has set up a 24-hour hotline for, and this is really for restaurants, for the businesses to get interpretive questions or other issues answered. And they've been very good about seeking guidance and providing guidance.
Good. Thanks. Yeah, that answers, I mean, that's about what I expected. With some ambiguity there. And that's something I think will ultimately drive some of our answers. We'll have to see how it goes, but we certainly don't want to put any of the restaurants or ourselves at a risk of either unsafe conditions or contrary to the recommendation. So that seems like something we need to be pretty on top of.
And we've got those rules from the DCEO are actually quite clear, and that doesn't mean they won't change, but they've been applied to our outdoor seating permits that have already been issued in the community relative to 6 feet of spacing, no more than 6 patrons at any one table. Village attorney is correct that there's no limitation relative to the relationship of those 6 people at a table, but they're fairly explicit about where those tables can go and how many people can sit at them. So those are fairly clear, and our restaurants are well aware of them.
Okay, my last comment, hopefully, sorry everybody. It seems like this proposal at the moment is really for 2 restaurants, right? The central dining service in the parking lot is for the 2 restaurants, close restaurants with sit-down seating, right? That's who the users are of this proposal here at the moment?
Potentially.
Potentially, particularly if they wanted to offer table service. But as we had talked about before, there's nothing that precludes a restaurant from, say, using one of those options or applying to use one of those options to have tables that can accommodate carry-out seating as well. So it's possible that they could be used by other restaurants as well if those restaurants want to provide furniture and maintain those tables.
Right.
I would assume Little Red Hen could possibly use some, or may use sidewalk in front of it, the way that other restaurants have used sidewalk.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're saying if they provide the furniture.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Correct.
We're not proposing that the village would provide furniture.
Yeah, and the permit process, I assume, is a free one. We're not collecting a fee on that.
We do not on the outdoor seating permit, no. For the normal sidewalk table permits.
We would not anticipate in this circumstance either collecting a permit fee, but there are requirements relative to the licensing agreement that we would want to make sure we're abided by, insurance
Right.
provisions and the like.
Right.
And disclaimers, we have other legal terms that we put into the agreement.
So that brings me back to the question, should we be telling staff that in order to get something going and help our restaurants as quickly as possible, let's put into effect the parking lot version and have them continue to work on all the other information we need and decide whether, having done that experiment, it works and whether we should refine it or change it, which we can take up at our next meeting in a couple of weeks.
Well, I am in favor of the parking lot version. I did want to make one comment since I understand the motion was going to also include giving staff the opportunity to speak with other restaurants regarding reserving some parking spaces. And I would definitely hope that Chief Lewandowski is definitely very involved in the process. I worry about the safety when we start allocating spaces where people aren't going to expect them to be eating areas. And I worry about elderly drivers. And I just want to make sure that safety is a real important consideration if you decide to take any spaces on something like Park Avenue and convert them.
That's the intention. That would be, as all of these efforts are, interdepartmental conversations. So these are not happening in one part of the organization without another part of the organization well aware of it. So it would be a certain, there would be certain difficulties with it, there's no doubt. And I wouldn't say that staff prefers it as an option. There are others that may be easier in terms of sidewalk seating. But again, we just have a limited geography in downtown Glencoe, and it's one of the things that makes the downtown what it is. It's very, it's wonderful from that standpoint, but it's also limiting in what you can do in these circumstances.
Yeah,
So
well,
if we can get rid of COVID-19, we'll be better off.
I could see where the the eastern end of the parking lot could actually work for a Meg's, because I think none of the restaurants are really finding that parking lot exactly contiguous to their position, and even with foodstuffs. So I think this is a very central location, and especially if you were to allocate any types of spaces that are in closest proximity to these restaurants or food areas, I think it could work, provided we have enough seating for.
We have heard from Megs that they might be interested in that with the Village Court parking lot. It's certainly, we have had conversations with all of our restaurants, so we're certainly not focused just on the two on Vernon, but as we talked about last month, if all of our restaurants were in one place, this would be a lot easier. We'd have a very different conversation, but they're all interspersed throughout. Finding the central location was something that was important, but Megs did say that this would be something that would be attractive to them, and certainly foodstuffs is right there, and that would be something that would be pretty easy for them too.
Yeah, that's the location that is most central to all of them. Could I have a motion to say, let's try that and then keep working on the other things?
I have a question. Go ahead, Barbara.
Right. Which is, I just wanted to clarify that the premise, President Levin, of what you're saying is that is the most operational, that's the thing that we could get up and running. It sounds that way to me too. If that's the case, then yes, I am absolutely in favor of it, but I just would like confirmation from staff about that.
We certainly could move forward with either option. point that I'll offer for consideration is if a restaurant were to use a tent in the village court lot option, they may incur cost if that tent comes down sooner than whatever term of rental agreement that they have, or their rental agreement may need to be modified to accommodate changes in the nature of that usage. But if that's a factor that they know to take into consideration, we can be fully transparent about that. I wanted to offer that though, just as a point of feedback.
I would say to answer that question as well, to further answer that question, Barbara, I think we would be able to get these options up and running as quickly as the restaurants might be able to get the options up and running. To some degree, it relies upon acquisition perhaps of tables and chairs and rentals and all of that. That can happen pretty quickly. We're pretty close, I think, with the documents that we would need from our risk managers as well as from our attorneys. And I think those could be finalized in the next few days, with the expectation that we would love to see something in place, even as early as this weekend, if it was possible. It's hard to commit to that because we don't hold all the cards, but the idea behind it would be that we would roll as quickly as we can. It's part of the reason why we wanted to schedule this meeting so quickly, to be able to get something moving along.
Gary?
I would suggest that, in fact, would move that we adopt the resolution as proposed, which of course does not specify any of these particular options and is as broad as the day is long, quite intentionally and well drafted that way, to allow us to move quickly as we go forward, as we need to be nimble about these things. And but with the obvious understanding that we seem to be coming to a consensus about the parking lot and using that and letting, going back and confirming with the restaurants, all of them, in terms of what their real interest is now that push is going to come to shove, and hopefully getting their commitments to use that. And then, if we need to get another special meeting quickly on the books, we'll do it. But otherwise, I would move to adopt the resolution as it is, with those understandings.
Is there a second to Gary's motion?
Yeah, I second that.
Could I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax?
Yes.
Trustee Listener?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Rubin?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Okay. We've survived that. Unless someone has any other business they need, I could use a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, before I call for roll call, I should ask Jordan, because I didn't bother to ask her. I assume we didn't get any other emails in during the meeting that we needed to read.
I'm just refreshing our inbox now. No, we did not receive any public comment during the meeting.
Okay. May I have a roll call on our motion to adjourn, please?
Trustee Hallwax?
Yes.
Trustee Listener?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Rubin?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for all of your participation and hard work, and I appreciate all the good input that we gave.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Be safe, everyone. Be well.
Good night.